Good evening, afternoon or morning. Movie Cat is at the microphone. Today I will tell about a movie where the main character is a city. For your attention is a romantic comedy by Woody Allen made in 2011. Midnight in Paris.
Private detective followed him.
And what happened?
I don't know. The detective is missing.
Gil and his fiancée Inez fly to Paris at the invitation of her parents. Gil is a highly paid Hollywood screenwriter, but his dream is to write a successful novel and move to live in Paris. He is in love with this city and often quotes Hemingway, who said about Paris, "The holiday that is always with you." Inez's parents are not big Francophiles. The mother hates traffic jams and the father disapproves that the French government did not support the Iraq War. Inez herself considers Gil's dreams to be something like the whims of a child. During lunch, Inez has been recognized by her former classmate Paul, who accidentally has lunch in the same restaurant. Paul and his wife offer to go on an excursion to Versailles tomorrow. Gil had his own program planned because he dreams of visiting a number of cafes and bars where famous writers of the 1920s worked on their books. However, Inez does not want to listen to him because Paul, in her opinion, is a highly educated, intelligent, and interesting man. Inez also suggests that Gil let Paul read his manuscript of the novel so that he can evaluate and write a critique about what is wrong with the book. Inez asks Gil to promise that if his first novel doesn't succeed, Gil will quit writing and go back to what he's good at, screenwriting. The next morning, while walking around Versailles, Paul asks Gil to share what his book is about. Gil does not want to do this because the novel is not yet finished. But Inez does not pay attention to this and tells. Gil's hero trades in a nostalgia store and dreams of living in the times from which his goods came. Gil made himself the prototype of the hero, as he himself would like to live in the 1920s. Paul immediately begins to psychoanalyze Gil, claiming that the writer has a golden age syndrome. This is when historical periods from the past seem more attractive for life than the present. A little later, Paul approaches Rodin's sculpture and, interrupting the guide, begins to talk about his biography and the history of the sculpture creation. When the guide rightly remarks that Paul is wrong about one fact, Paul condescendingly hints that it is the guide does not know his business well enough. Then they all go to a tasting of expensive wines and after, Paul suggests they need go dancing. A few drunk Gil refuses because he wants to get some air and also walk around the city he is in love with. Inez goes to the dance with Paul and his wife. Gil takes long walks through Paris, and when he gets tired, he realizes that he does not remember which way his hotel is. The rare French people he meets don't speak English and can't help him, so Gil sits down on the steps to rest for a bit. Somewhere nearby, a big bell rings, indicating that it is already midnight. Suddenly, a vintage car drives out from around the corner. People unknown to Gil stop and start calling him to go with them. Gil initially refuses, thinking they mistook him for another person. But people are persistent and he eventually agrees. In the car, people dressed in the old fashion drink champagne and treat Gil. A few minutes later, the car stops and the strangers go to the bar and, of course, invite Gil to come along. A dumbfounded Gil gets caught up in the 1920th period atmosphere and thinks it's a prank or an old-fashioned party. Noticing his confused look, a couple approach him and introduce themselves as Zelda and Scott Fitzgerald. Gil, hearing the name of a famous American writer who died in 1940, dismisses it as a mere coincidence. Gil really likes the music played by a man at the piano. Gil says that he has heard this eternal hit on old records before. Zelda is a little surprised as Cole Porter today performs his song Let's Do It, Let's Fall in Love for the first time. After a noisy party, Scott Fitzgerald invites Gil to Polydor, one of the best places in Paris, in his opinion. After all, they make an explosive whiskey cocktail. Scott introduces Gil to his friend and colleague, Ernest Hemingway. Gil had already drunk enough by this point not to doubt and question the incredible things that are happening. Gil admits to Hemingway that he considers all of his books brilliant. Hemingway easily agrees with this and says that the book cannot be bad if the story is true. He also adds that it's not noble to die in a war in the mud, thinking that Gil is focusing on his latest novel on this day, A Farewell to Arms. Gil asks Hemingway for the favor of reading and making an opinion about his novel. Hemingway replies that he already hates Gil's book, because if it's bad, he'll hate it. If it is good, he will envy and also hate, because all writers are competitors. Hemingway refuses to read a book, but instead offers to show the novel to Gertrude Stein, a writer, literary critic and a woman with a great instinct for geniuses. Stunned by this turn, Gil promises to run for his handwritten text. Running out of Polydor, Gil reaches the middle of the street and realizes that he did not agree with Hemingway where and when they will meet. Gil returns and finds a modern laundry room on the place where the bar used to be. To the left and right of his there is also nothing like Polydor. In the morning, he wakes up in a hotel and tells Inez that he spent the night with Hemingway and Fitzgerald. No, not in a dream, but in reality. To this, Inez replies that it looks like a brain cancer is starting to develop in Gil's head. Inez ignores Gil's desire to stay at the hotel to work on his novel, because her mother allowed them to take advantage of the decorator's discount. She wants to buy 2 wooden chairs for $20,000 each for their future Malibu beach home. Gil refuses, and for this, Inez and her mother call him a greedy man. In the evening after dinner, Gil says that he has a surprise for Inez and with great difficulty persuading her to take a walk. He leads his bride to the very steps where he was picked up by a car yesterday. Gil realized that it was the car that transported him to the past. They wait for a while, but nothing happens, and then Inez, angry, takes a taxi and goes to the hotel. A minute later, a bell starts ringing and immediately an old model car comes around the corner. Hemingway meets him inside. On the way, he tells how he was at the front during the First World War. Hemingway believes that if a man loves a truly magnificent woman, then in moments of passion he forgets about death. Gil disappointedly admits that such thing does not happen to him. At Gertrude Stein's house, Gil meets Pablo Picasso. The artist defends from criticism the portrait of his mistress Adriana, which he painted. Gertrude believes that the picture does not fully reflect Adriana, but only shows the girl's eroticism. Gil gives his manuscript to Gertrude, and he goes to wait in the next room. Where Adriana meets him, she fully shares Gil's opinion that it used to be better. The streets were more beautiful, and the artists and writers were more skilled masters. But for her, the golden age is the 1890s. Suddenly, Hemingway interrupts them and offers to go for a drink, but Gil refuses and returns to the hotel. The next day, Inez is having dinner with her parents. Gil's absence she explains by the fact that he makes his stupid inspirational walks around Paris. Inez quickly leaves as well, because Paul has invited her to the dance again. Paul's wife has caught a cold, so Inez will go dancing with him alone. At night, Gil travels back to the 1920s. He meets with Adriana and they walk around Paris at night. Gil is in love with this city and he tells Adriana that no picture or book can compete in beauty with the great city. Later at the bar, Gil tells her about his fiancée and how much he loves her, even though they do not agree on important things, such as the choice of occupation or place to live. But they both like Indian cuisine, not the whole cuisine, but only pita bread. Adriana is not pleased to hear Gil's story about his fiancée and she politely says goodbye and quickly goes home. In the morning, at the hotel, Gil wakes up horny and wants to have sex with Inez, but she refuses, saying that they don't have time for this nonsense, because Paul said they should have lunch with him. However, Inez adds that she will have a great time there alone if Gil does not go. Inez's father does not understand where Gil goes every night and, suspecting the worst, hires a detective to spy on him. Gil is walking through the market when he hears the music of Cole Porter. A nice pretty girl is selling one of the records to Gil. She is pleasantly surprised that the buyer has such good taste in music, as she herself is also a big fan of Cole Porter. Having traveled once again to the past, Gil goes to Gertrude Stein to give her his manuscript, where he rewrote the first chapters. Gil has added events that are happening to him right now to the book and wants to know if he is heading in the right direction. Later, he finds Adriana and invites her to take a walk. Gil is kissing her on the summer terrace of the cafe when suddenly a horse-drawn carriage drives up to them. People get out and call Gil and Adriana to go with them for a drink. When the carriage stops, Adriana says that this street is great. This is what architecture and city lights looked like 30 years ago. At the Café Maxim, Adriana is very impressed by the new Cancan dance, and later, at the next table, she cites the famous artists Gauguin and Degas. Adriana realizes that somehow she ended up in the 1890s, exactly at the time where she always dreamed of living. Gauguin and Degas, meanwhile, in their conversation, come to the conclusion that their own generation is empty, and it would be better for them to live during the Renaissance. Adriana suggests Gil not return to their time in the 1920s, but instead stay here. Gil admits that the 1920s are not his time. He came from 2010 and ended up in her era because he tried to escape from his present. Gil, after the words of Gauguin and Degas, suddenly understood everything and is trying to explain to Adriana that the present does not bring satisfaction, because life itself does not bring satisfaction, and they need to get rid of the illusion that they would have been happier in the past. Adriana smiles sadly for this and says goodbye to Gil. Then Gil returns to the 1920s and heads to Gertrude Stein. She read the revised chapters and was completely satisfied. She also says that Hemingway also read the novel. He liked everything, but he had one addition to the plot. Hemingway does not believe that the main character does not see how his fiancée has an affair with another hero, with whom she constantly goes to dance. Gil returns to the hotel accusing Inez of adultery because Hemingway told him so, and it is impossible to deceive him. Inez thinks that Gil has gone mad or that his brain cancer has reactivated. However, she admits that she was with Paul for several nights. After all, he is so romantic and knows French. However, she believes that Gil has to blame himself and will have to think about it when they return to California. Gil refuses to return and decides to stay in Paris, not because of her affair, but because he is happy here and they both have nothing in common. Gil leaves and closes the door behind. The father admits to Inez that he hired a detective to follow Gil, though it was not possible to find out what he was doing, because the detective disappeared without a trace. Meanwhile, 4 centuries ago, the detective finds himself in the palace of the King of France and the guards immediately start chasing him. Gil is walking around Paris late in the evening and suddenly meets a girl who has sold him a Cole Porter record. She says that her name is Gabrielle and she recently remembered Gil because she had a new Cole Porter record. Gil confesses to her that he has decided to stay in Paris forever and offers to walk her home. Gabrielle agrees. Thank you for watching. And what time is the golden age for you? The time where you would like to live? Write in the comments. Please don't forget to subscribe and press the hearts.